I've always believed that the key to a successful life is hard work, sacrifice, and building a future. It's what I was taught as a kid: do what's necessary now, and everything will fall into place later. My name is David, and for years I thought I was doing everything right. I had a steady job, a beautiful wife named Sarah, and two amazing kids. I was living the dream. Or at least I thought I was. But deep down, I felt a growing pressure. The kind that slowly creeps into your chest when you wake up in the middle of the night and wonder if you're actually doing enough. You know, the feeling that maybe all your effort isn't really getting you closer to your real goals. I wasn't a bad guy. I didn't cheat, I didn't lie, but I was consumed by the idea that I had to provide more, better, faster. I believed that if I worked harder, if I kept pushing, I could secure a future where Sarah and I would never want for anything. I was so focused on the big picture, on what was coming down the road, that I lost sight of the present. I was constantly on my laptop, hustling, making deals, working late nights. But in my mind, it was all for them, for us. Sarah, she understood. Or so I thought. She'd always supported me, at least that's how I saw it. She told me she loved my ambition, my drive, my focus. But it wasn't until later that I realized how much I was taking her for granted. I was running in a race I'd set up for myself, not realizing that Sarah was running beside me, silently struggling to keep up. But for me, the race wasn't about her. It was about building something bigger. It was about achieving everything I'd ever dreamed of. I was so focused on the prize that I failed to see the toll it was taking on her. As I became more successful, the distance between us grew. It wasn't physical at first, but emotional. I thought she was fine, that she was happy with the life we had. But somewhere along the way, she started to feel like I was more married to my career than to her. And I couldn't even see it. The truth is, I was blind to my own shortcomings. I believed the lie that if you just give everything for the future, the present will sort itself out. But the more I focused on doing the right thing for the future, the more I neglected the one person I loved the most in the world. The woman who had stood by me for years. It wasn't an overnight decision, but the moment I realized things weren't right, it hit me hard. One evening, Sarah sat across from me, the weight of something unsaid hanging in the air. I remember the silence, the kind that feels like it could swallow you whole. I was too wrapped up in my own world to notice the little things, how she barely smiled anymore, how her eyes seemed tired even when she was rested. But that night she spoke up. "David, I think we need to talk." There it was. Those words. The ones no one ever wants to hear, especially when you think everything's fine. I had this sinking feeling in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. I was convinced that if I kept working hard, kept pushing forward, everything would work itself out. I'd been too busy, too focused on my career, but I could fix it. I had to, but Sarah's voice, her words, stopped me dead in my tracks. She said it with that calm but steady tone that I knew too well. "I don't feel like we're really connected anymore, David. I don't feel like you see me. You're always thinking about the future, but what about now? What about us?" At that moment, it was as if the world around me stood still. I was speechless. I could see the pain in her eyes, and yet I didn't know how to respond. All this time, I'd been blind to the fact that Sarah was slipping away, not because she didn't love me, but because she didn't feel seen, heard, or valued. She was losing herself in the shadow of my ambitions. I remember sitting there, frozen, feeling a mix of guilt and confusion. I tried to reason with her. "I'm doing this for us, Sarah. I'm working so hard so we can have a better life. Don't you see that? I'm doing all of this for our future." But she shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I want to share a future with you, David. But I need you here now. I need you to be present." In that moment, everything I believed came crashing down. I had spent years building this idea of success, of providing, and yet I had never stopped to think that maybe the most important thing I could provide wasn't more money or bigger houses. It was my time, my attention, my love. So, I made a decision. A painful one. I realized that I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. I couldn't keep living in this illusion that Sarah would wait around for me to get my priorities straight. As much as I loved her, I felt like I was drowning in the pressure of everything I had to do. I told her I needed space. I needed to figure things out. But deep down, I knew that this space might lead to more than just distance. It might lead to a permanent break. I told myself it was for the best. I told myself it was the right thing to do, that I needed to focus on myself for a while, and then maybe, just maybe, things could work out. But even as I said it, a part of me felt like I was tearing apart the only thing that had ever truly mattered. That night, I went to bed feeling like I had made the right decision. But inside, I knew something was broken beyond repair. I had let the idea of success become more important than the people who mattered most to me. After the breakup, things were quieter. At first, I thought I was doing the right thing, taking some time to breathe and figure things out. There was a strange sense of relief that came with being alone. I was free from the tension, from the unspoken expectations, from the guilt that had started to weigh on me. I focused entirely on work. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. No more conversations about feelings, no more guilt about not being present. Just the sweet sound of silence, the feeling of not having to answer to anyone. For a while, I was okay. I threw myself into my work, determined to keep moving forward, thinking that the more successful I became, the easier it would be to fix everything later. I even started going out more, meeting new people, hanging with old friends, trying to fill the emptiness that Sarah had left behind. But it wasn't enough. I started to feel this growing sense of loneliness, a hollowness that I couldn't fill with anything: work, friends, or even casual relationships. It was a nagging ache that wouldn't go away. I remember sitting in my office late one night, staring out at the city lights. It was peaceful, almost comforting. But then, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I missed her. I missed Sarah. It wasn't just her presence either. I missed the little things. The way she made me coffee in the morning, the way she would always ask me how my day went. I even missed the way she would laugh at my bad jokes, a laugh that always managed to make me feel like I was the funniest guy in the world. In that moment, I realized that I had spent all this time thinking about fixing my life, but I hadn't spent a single moment thinking about what was truly important: her. Still, I convinced myself that I needed more time, more space. I told myself it wasn't the right time to reach out. After all, I had walked away from this relationship because I thought it would make things better. But as the months dragged on, I realized that the space wasn't helping, it was just making the void larger. I remember one of the first times I saw her after the breakup. It wasn't planned. I was out for a walk, trying to clear my head, when I ran into her in the park. Sarah looked different. She looked content. Not just with herself, but with everything. I could see it in the way she held herself, the way she smiled when she saw me. It hurt. I wasn't angry, not at her, but at myself. I had let something beautiful slip through my fingers. We exchanged a few polite words, talked about the kids, about mutual friends, but there was this quiet distance between us now. It wasn't the same as before. Something had changed, and I couldn't put my finger on it. It was like we were strangers, two people who had once been so close, now standing on opposite sides of the same road. When I left that day, I thought I was okay. But in the days that followed, I realized I wasn't. I had spent all this time thinking that time apart would fix things, that the distance would help me get my bearings. But all it did was make me realize how much I missed her, how much I had taken her for granted. The relief I thought I'd found was nothing more than a mirage, a temporary escape from the reality that I had lost the most important person in my life. It happened on a Sunday morning, one of those crisp fall days when the air feels just cold enough to wake you up. I was in my usual routine, coffee in hand, taking a stroll through the downtown farmers' market. I'd been trying to pick up new habits, anything to distract me from the emptiness I was feeling. Walking through the market had become a sort of ritual, a way to remind myself that life was still moving forward, even if I wasn't, and then I saw her. Sarah. She was standing at a stall, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite. She looked so natural, so at ease, as if the weight of the world had finally lifted off her shoulders. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, like some awkward bystander watching someone else's life play out. But it wasn't someone else's life, it was mine. Or at least it had been. I debated whether to walk over or just turn around and leave. But before I could decide, she noticed me. Our eyes met, and for a brief second, it felt like time rewound itself, taking me back to the days when things were simple, when love was enough. She smiled, not the full, radiant smile I used to know, but a polite one, like she wasn't quite sure what to say. "David," she said, her voice steady but careful. "It's been a while." It wasn't much, just a few words, but hearing her say my name after so long stirred something deep within me. We talked briefly, mostly small talk. How was work? How was life? The kind of conversation you'd have with an old friend, not the person who once knew every corner of your soul. But as we talked, I noticed something I hadn't expected. She seemed genuinely happy. And then I saw him. A man walked up beside her, carrying a bag of fresh produce. He was tall, with an easy smile, the kind of guy who looked like he had his life together. Sarah introduced him as Ethan, a friend she'd met through mutual acquaintances. But I could see it in the way she looked at him, the way he gently placed his hand on her back. It was more than friendship. I should have been prepared for this. I'd known we were apart, that life doesn't wait for anyone. But seeing her with someone else felt like a dagger to the heart. I managed to keep my composure, smiling and nodding through the rest of the conversation, but inside, I was reeling. When we parted ways, I walked home in a daze. My mind was racing, replaying the encounter over and over. I told myself I should be happy for her, that she deserved to move on and find happiness. But all I could think about was how I had let her slip away. How I had pushed her into the arms of someone else because I was too blind to see what I had when I had it. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with 1,000 emotions. Jealousy, regret, sadness, but also something unexpected, clarity. For the first time, I realized just how deeply I had failed her, not just as a partner but as a person. I had been so caught up in chasing my version of success that I'd forgotten what success really meant. It wasn't about money or status, it was about love. Connection, being there for the people who matter most. Seeing Sarah with Ethan was a wake-up call. It forced me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding, that I had spent so much time blaming circumstances, work, and life for our breakup, but the truth was, I had been the one who let her go. And now, I wasn't sure if I could ever get her back. After seeing Sarah with Ethan, something shifted inside me. I couldn't shake the image of her smiling at him, of her finding happiness in a way I hadn't been able to give her. It wasn't anger or bitterness that consumed me, though. It was regret. A deep, gnawing regret that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. I started revisiting memories I had buried, moments I had dismissed as unimportant at the time. Like the night she stayed up late to help me prepare for a big presentation, even though she had an early meeting the next day. Or the time she planned an entire weekend getaway to give us a break from the stress of our lives, only for me to cancel last minute because work needed me. I realized how often she had shown up for me while I had been too focused on my own ambitions to do the same for her. One memory hit me particularly hard. It was a rainy evening, a few months before the breakup. Sarah had tried to talk to me about feeling distant, about how she missed the closeness we used to have. I remember brushing her off, saying I didn't have time for relationship drama. That phrase, relationship drama, echoed in my head like a haunting refrain. I had dismissed her feelings as an inconvenience, failing to see them as the warning signs they were. That realization was like a punch to the gut. For so long, I had convinced myself that our breakup was inevitable, a product of circumstances beyond our control. But now, I saw it differently. I had made choices, selfish, short-sighted choices, that had driven a wedge between us. And if I was ever going to find peace, I needed to take responsibility for those choices. I decided to confront my past, starting with the one person who knew me better than anyone, my sister, Emily. She had always been my sounding board, the one who could call me out without making me feel judged. When I told her about seeing Sarah, she didn't sugarcoat her response. David, you loved her. That much was obvious to everyone. But love isn't enough if you're not willing to fight for it. You've spent your whole life running from anything that felt too hard, and Sarah was no exception. Her words stung, but they were exactly what I needed to hear. For the first time, I saw myself through someone else's eyes, not as a victim of bad timing, but as someone who had been too scared to face the challenges that come with love. I realized that if I wanted to move forward, I needed to stop running and start taking accountability. The next step was harder than I expected. I sat down and wrote Sarah a letter, not an apology, but an honest reflection of everything I had done wrong. I told her about the regrets that kept me up at night, about the things I wished I had said and done differently. I didn't ask for her forgiveness or her love. I simply wanted her to know that I understood my mistakes and that I was grateful for everything she had given me, even when I didn't deserve it. When I finally mailed the letter, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't closure, exactly, but it was a step toward it. I had spent so long avoiding the pain of my past. And now, for the first time, I was facing it head on. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I didn't expect to hear back from Sarah after sending the letter. To me, it was a way to let go of the weight I'd been carrying, not a means to reopen a chapter one thought was closed. But just a week later, I found an envelope in my mailbox with her handwriting on it. My heart raced as I held it, debating whether to open it right then or wait until I could gather myself. Curiosity won. Inside was a handwritten note. Her words were careful yet heartfelt. She thanked me for the honesty in my letter, for acknowledging the pain I had caused. But what struck me most was how she shared her side of the story. Sarah admitted that while she had been hurt by my actions, she had also realized how much pressure she had put on me to be everything at once: a provider, a partner, a dream chaser. We both made mistakes, she wrote. But those mistakes don't define us. Her kindness floored me. She could have dismissed my letter, held on to the resentment, or ignored me entirely. Instead, she chose to respond with grace and understanding. She mentioned Ethan, saying he was someone who had brought light back into her life, but also made it clear that their relationship wasn't as perfect as it seemed. Happiness isn't about finding someone flawless, she wrote. It's about learning to accept imperfections and still choosing each other. Those words stuck with me. For so long, I had blamed myself for not being enough, but Sarah's response reminded me that relationships are a two-way street. We had both failed each other in different ways, but her letter wasn't about reopening old wounds, it was about healing them. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Not necessarily for us to get back together, but for myself, to grow, to learn, and maybe, one day, to love again. After reading Sarah's letter, I found myself in a strange state of calm. For the first time in years, I felt free, not from the relationship, but from the blame I'd been carrying. It was like a door had closed gently behind me, leaving room to focus on the one person I had been neglecting the most, myself. I started small. I revisited old hobbies I had long abandoned: woodworking, running, even sketching, which I hadn't done since college. These weren't just distractions, they were ways to reconnect with who I was outside of the roles I had tried to fulfill. I realized how much of myself I had given up in pursuit of an ideal version of success, a version that had left me feeling empty. One evening, as I sanded the edge of a wooden chair I'd been restoring, I had a moment of clarity. Life isn't about filling every space with achievement or approval, it's about finding balance, about leaving room for the things that truly matter. For me, that meant rebuilding not just my skills or passions, but my sense of self-worth. I also made changes in my work life. For years, I had poured everything into my career, chasing promotions and accolades without questioning what they cost me. Now I started setting boundaries, leaving the office on time, saying no to unnecessary projects, and making space for things that enriched my life outside of work. It wasn't easy, but every small step felt like a victory. As I focused on myself, I began to see the world differently. I noticed how often I had overlooked the little joys, like a crisp morning breeze or the smell of fresh coffee. I wasn't just healing, I was rediscovering what it meant to be alive. It was a typical Saturday morning, and I found myself at the local farmer's market, a place I rarely visited in the past. I was picking out vegetables, more focused on finding the ripest tomatoes than anything else, when I heard a soft, cheerful voice behind me. "David? Is that you?" I turned around, and there she was, Emily. Not my sister, but Emily Jones, an old friend from high school. We hadn't spoken in over 20 years, but her warm smile made it feel like no time had passed. She had always been the bright, creative one back in the day, and somehow, she still carried that same energy. We spent the next half hour catching up, talking about everything from career changes to how much the town had changed. She shared that she moved back recently to be closer to her family after going through her own rough patch, a divorce that had left her rethinking what she wanted in life. There was no sadness in her voice, just a sense of resilience and self-awareness that resonated deeply with me. As we talked, I realized something I hadn't felt in years, a genuine connection. It wasn't forced, like trying to impress a client, nor was it weighed down by guilt or regret. It was just two people enjoying each other's company, sharing pieces of their lives without judgment. Before we parted ways, Emily asked if I'd like to meet for coffee sometime. Her invitation was casual, almost as if she didn't expect me to say yes. But I did. Not because I was looking for romance or trying to fill a void, but because I wanted to keep exploring this unexpected spark of connection. As I walked away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not the kind tied to someone else, but the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, I was ready for a new beginning. When I met Emily for coffee a few days later, I expected a friendly conversation, maybe a nostalgic walk down memory lane. What I didn't expect was how effortlessly the time would pass. Hours slipped by as we talked about everything: our childhood misadventures, the lessons we'd learned from life's curveballs, and even the dreams we'd once held but had since let go of. With Emily, it felt easy, natural, safe, but as much as I enjoyed her company, a quiet voice in the back of my mind kept whispering doubts. Could I trust myself to open up again? To let someone in without fear of repeating the same mistakes? The scars from my past with Sarah weren't as raw as they once were, but they still lingered. A reminder of the risks that come with vulnerability. Emily seemed to sense my hesitation. She didn't push or probe, instead, she shared her own struggles with trust after her divorce. "I think trust isn't something you just give or take," she said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "It's something you build together, one small step at a time." Her words stuck with me. Trust wasn't a leap of faith, it was a bridge, built piece by piece through shared experiences, honesty, and patience. I realized that if I wanted to move forward, I had to let go of the fear holding me back. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I continued to spend time together. We went for walks, cooked dinner, and even tackled a DIY project to restore an old bookshelf she found at a thrift store. Each moment felt like a step forward, not just in building something with her, but in rebuilding my confidence in myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And I wasn't doing it alone. One evening, Emily and I found ourselves sitting on her porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. We were both quiet, sipping tea, the kind of silence that doesn't feel awkward but comforting. I glanced over at her, noticing the way the fading sunlight highlighted the streaks of silver in her hair, and it hit me: this felt different. It wasn't the rush of infatuation I'd once mistaken for love, it was deeper, steadier, like the quiet warmth of a fire on a cold night. For the first time, I allowed myself to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, I could love again. As the weeks turned into months, Emily and I grew closer. We didn't try to define what we had or rush into labels. Instead, we let it unfold naturally, like the changing of the seasons. She wasn't just someone I was seeing, she was becoming my partner in every sense of the word. We shared our fears, our hopes, and even our regrets, And in doing so, we built something I hadn't believed was possible, a love rooted in understanding and mutual respect. One weekend, we took a trip to the coast. Standing on the shore, watching the waves crash against the rocks, Emily turned to me and asked, "Do you think all the pain we've been through was worth it if it brought us here?" Her question caught me off guard, but as I looked at her, I knew my answer. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Because it taught me what love really is. It's not perfect or easy, but it's honest. It's choosing each other, every single day." As we stood there, hand in hand, I realized that I wasn't just moving on, I was moving forward. Emily wasn't Sarah, and this love wasn't a second chance, it was a new beginning. A year ago, I never would have imagined myself here. My life had felt like a series of closed doors, each one marked by loss, regret, or fear. But now, as I looked around the room at the people who mattered most to me, Emily, my family, and a few close friends, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Emily and I had decided to host a small dinner party to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of our official relationship. The idea was hers, of course. She loved bringing people together, and her warmth had a way of making everyone feel at home. As I watched her laugh with my sister, I realized how much she had not only become a part of my life but also enriched it in ways I hadn't thought possible. After dinner, I found myself outside, looking up at the stars. Emily joined me, slipping her hand into mine. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. I paused, considering how to put it into words. "I guess I'm just grateful," I said finally. "Grateful for you, for this. For the chance to start over." Emily smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "You've come a long way, David," she said. "We both have." Her words stayed with me long after the night ended. She was right. I had learned that happiness wasn't something you stumbled upon. It was something you built, brick by brick, through love, forgiveness, and a willingness to grow. And the life I was living now wasn't a consolation prize. It was a life I had earned through resilience and hope. Looking back, I could see how every painful chapter had shaped me, leading me to where I was now. It wasn't perfect, life never is, but it was real, and it was mine. As Emily and I stood together under the vast night sky, I felt something I hadn't in years: whole.